Season 1 of House of the Dragon came out in 2022 as a prequel to Game of Thrones. Upon its release, audiences took note of the show's inclusion of black characters in major roles. Since coming out in 2011, GOT has been criticized for its lack of diversity and focus on white characters and perspectives. The creators of House of the Dragon wanted to remedy this by casting people of color in lead, non-stereotypical roles. Co-creator Ryan Condal said in an interview with The Wrap, "It's 2022. It's a different era than these shows used to be made in. The world changed a lot between 2011 and 2021, and so did what audiences expect to see on camera." The show cast Steve Toussaint as Corlys Velaryon, a character who was originally white in the book, and from there, black actors were cast as his family members, and the noble people of House Velaryon became mostly black, in contrast to the white Targaryens and other nobles in GOT. While the creators consciously set out to increase the amount of people of color in Hot D, they employed a colorblind approach to casting. I argue that, because House of the Dragon portrays real-world realities and social problems, its colorblind approach and failure to acknowledge racism is ignorant and works against the show's themes about social inequality. According to Emil Martins and Deborah Pavoa, colorblindness is an ideology that emerged in the 70s which embraces the idea that racial inequality and systemic racism no longer exist, and people have access to the same opportunities regardless of race. Colorblind logic is manifested in the practices of plastic representation and assimilation. Kristen Warner describes plastic representation by referencing Jay-Z's Moonlight video, in which Friends is rebooted with a black cast. She says, "Swapping in and out racial groups with little adjustment to the parts themselves retains the original work as the primary driver, and as a result marks the changes as superficial. The original work maintains its universality by proving that anyone can be a member of the Friends cast." This yields a set of dueling consequences. First, that any representation that includes a person of color is automatically a sign of success and progress. Second, that such paltry gains generate an easy workaround, whereby hiring racially diverse actors becomes an easy substitute for developing new, complex characters. The results of such choices can feel artificial, like plastic. The black characters in House of the Dragon are an instance of plastic representation. The Velaryons are white in the book, and black actors were basically cast into the molds of white characters. While creating characters regardless of race may seem like a step in the right direction, as it encourages us to believe that race doesn't matter, the reality is that race does matter, and pretending that it doesn't won't make inequality go away. Warner also says that when we consider assimilating black people into whiteness as successful black representation, we oversimplify the complexities of black identity. Herman Gray identifies assimilation as one of the main ways that blackness is represented in TV. Gray considers shows assimilationists to the extent that the worlds they construct are distinguished by the complete elimination or marginalization of social and cultural difference in the interest of shared and universal similarity. Putting black characters into white worlds and acting like they experience it no differently may seem like it rejects racism and embraces racial harmony, but it actually promotes the idea that society has moved past racism. Gray also discusses how assimilation embraces a white point of view, saying that for shows who practice it, whiteness is the privileged yet unnamed place from which to see and make sense of the world. This applies to Hot D, where black people are put into a white space and made to have the same experiences as whites. The show's use of colorblindness comes from a white perspective in which dealing with the complexity of race is uncomfortable, and it's more ideal to just act like racism isn't an issue. If I had to describe Hot D and GOT in 2 words, they would be the system. As Jesse Gender discusses in a video essay, GOT and Hot D are at their core about a hegemonic social system and how this system shapes the characters' lives. Every major conflict is a result of people taking actions to get power over others. The Iron Throne, which can synonymously be known as the system, is always the object of concern. Made of the swords of conquered peoples, the Iron Throne is a symbol of the violence and oppression that organizes the realm. Westeros is a highly prejudiced, hierarchical society, where institutional discrimination is rampant. Classism, misogyny, homophobia, ableism, xenophobia, and basically every other kind of prejudice are heavily present. Hot D itself is literally about patriarchy. In an interview with The Hollywood Reporter, showrunner Miguel Sapochnik says the theme of the show is that the patriarchy would rather destroy itself than see a woman on the throne. The awful social conditions in GOT create the foundation for what viewers know about Westeros and Hot D. I think the creators depict such discrimination in order to achieve medieval realism, recognize the role that prejudice plays in people's lives, and mirror the real world, past and present. There are debates about whether or not GOT is going for historical realism. While it's a fantasy show, its setting and brutal discrimination suggest that Westeros is meant to mirror the actual past. Fantasy author John Adcock says that George R.R. Martin writes grounded, historically based fantasy that appeals largely because they are so grimly real. To a large and often uncomfortable degree, Mr. Martin is writing history, with a few ice zombies and dragons tossed in. Sapochnik agreed when discussing how sex and misogyny are portrayed in Hot D. He says that the approach to those subjects are done carefully, thoughtfully, and we don't shy away from it. If anything, we're going to shine a light on that aspect. You can't ignore the violence that was perpetrated on women by men in that time. It shouldn't be downplayed and it shouldn't be glorified. This makes sense, but it's contradicted by a statement made by the other showrunner Ryan Condal in an interview with The Wrap. When asked about black characters in Hot D, Condal said, "This is a fantasy world. I think if this was a historical fiction piece, it would be more nuanced discussion. But I think simply because this is a fantasy world, if we believe in dragons and shapeshifters, we can believe everybody in the story isn't white." This idealistic sentiment reflects the motivation of colorblindness. When you combine the ways that the showrunners discuss race with the hierarchical and prejudiced society of Westeros, something feels off. Race in Hot D is a nuanced discussion because the show depicts a socio-political reality that mirrors the real world. Because Hot D emphasizes different types of systemic discrimination, not including race as a factor in that discrimination sends the message that systemic racism isn't a problem in the real world. Furthermore, the show's failure to acknowledge race creates a lack of intersectionality. According to the Center for Intersectional Justice, intersectionality describes the ways in which systems of inequality based on factors such as gender, race, and class intersect to create unique dynamics and effects. All forms of inequality are mutually reinforcing and therefore must be considered simultaneously. In Hot D, facets of people's identities contribute to how they experience the system. Race not being considered as one of those facets works to remove intersectionality from the narrative of systemic issues. While the show is already not acknowledging racial identities and associated experiences, it additionally positions race as existing in a vacuum, able to be removed from someone's experience without affecting other aspects of their life. This further downplays the role of systemic racism in society. In Hot D, some characters' experiences are shaped by their intersecting identities. Rhaenyra experiences prejudice for being a woman, but also privilege for being the princess. Hot D does include intersectionality in its portrayal of the system, but it doesn't include race as a factor. Laenor experiences many hardships due to being gay. The shame he carries about his sexuality and his performance as a straight man take a massive toll on his life. Through Laenor, Hot D shows the discrimination against queer people in Westeros. However, Laenor's blackness isn't addressed. His gay experience is equated to the experience of white gay men in GOT. In reality, Laenor would experience queerness differently than queer white people, in the same way that he experiences queerness differently than people who aren't in the noble class. To borrow a phrase from Alfred L. Martin, Hot D has left the intersection of race and queerness untouched and unexamined. The same applies to the intersection of race with any other aspect of identity. House of the Dragon ultimately undermines the role that race plays in society. There are consequences for this kind of rhetoric. Consistent use of colorblind logic in TV shows enforces the idea within the industry that effective diversity and authentic representation can be achieved by just putting people of color on screen. People's views about individuals from certain demographics are influenced by how those individuals are depicted in media. By encouraging a raceless worldview, House of the Dragon discourages critical thinking about the realities of systemic racism.